Hey everyone, it's 1 p.m. Eastern. It's time for another conversation on Darshan Talks. Today's conversation is about the 340B program. We've had our guest here before. If you are a pharmacist, if you are interested in 340B, if you don't know what that means and why it matters, this is probably the right conversation for you. Our guest today is the president and CEO of Integrated Pharmacy Services. It's a 340B consulting firm. This is a Darshan Talks live stream. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. My guest is Rita Baskett. Like I mentioned, she's a pharmacist. I'm a pharmacist. Neither one of us are giving you any kind of clinical advice. I'm an attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice. These are conversations. This is intended for educational purposes. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share. Please feel free to ask our guest questions. You can also reach out to me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to my website, DarshanTalks.com. You can reach Rita at rita.baskett with double T. That's rita.baskett at ipconsults.com, or just go to our website at ipconsults.com, and those are showing up on your screen as we speak. Hey, Rita, how are you?
Hi, I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to have you back. It's been a while. How has the new year been treating you?
Things been great. I can't complain. I can't, but I'm thankful to be back. Thank you for having me again. And I think we're going to have a fun segment here today.
That sounds fun. So I want to talk a little bit about just the 340B program. And I want to hear a little bit more about what's going on in it. It's been a busy enough area, but let's talk from the beginning, which is the last time you and I spoke, there was a whole conversation about how pharmaceutical manufacturers are denying more and more of these 340B program claims. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what's going on there?
Sure. And this is really actually directed to the hospitals, which is pretty sad because hospitals, especially participating in 340B, are usually your safety net hospitals for your community. So it's typically going to be a hospital that takes care of a disproportionate share of indigent patients, basically to even qualify for 340B. So the current trend that's happening, which is very unfortunate, is the manufacturers are denying 340B pricing to hospitals that have multiple contract pharmacy arrangements, or if they have contract pharmacies. So if you're a hospital with your own retail pharmacy, they will not give pricing to your contracted related pharmacies because you have an in-house retail pharmacy. If you don't have an in-house retail pharmacy, they'll allow you to get pricing at one pharmacy and not the multiple that you may have on board. So this is restricting the program and restricting the program savings that was intended for covered entities, for the hospitals. Well, now they don't do this to the HRSA grantees, which is shocking.
Well, hold on. Let's understand that, though. I want to understand what that means before we get into, because I think you're going to get into the second level of this. But before we do that, why does the fact that a hospital has a retail pharmacy matter? Why is that relevant?
So it's relevant because what a lot of organizations, a lot of hospitals do is provide charity care and indigent care services within their retail pharmacies and also through some of their contract pharmacy relationships as well. So they may have copay card assistance, things of that nature to make sure patients stay adherent to their medication therapy to keep them out of the hospital, to keep them out of readmissions. So a lot of hospitals, I would say probably prior to 2010, no, probably prior to 2000, a lot of hospitals had owned their own retail pharmacies. But then that business kind of went to the wayside. So when contract pharmacy exploded after 2010, hospitals decided, well, I don't need my own pharmacy. We'll just work with our contracted related pharmacies to ensure program patients get their meds, copay assistance, things of that nature, and also bring revenue back to the hospital from their 340B program. So manufacturers got upset, and they've been upset about the 340B program for a long time. So what they decided to do, and we're now up to 13 manufacturers. I think when we talked back in November, I think there was probably 8 or something like that. Now we're up to 13 drug manufacturers, big manufacturers that are deciding to limit their sales in those contract pharmacy relationships unless the hospital provides them with prescription data pertaining to their drugs. So what they want is retail claim data to be uploaded to this one portal, this company called 340B ESP. And they want the data because they're claiming they want to prevent duplicate discounts. So the manufacturers are upset because they're paying a 340B rebate in the form of a 340B price to the covered entities. And then the PBMs are requesting another rebate for whatever they managed and agreed with the manufacturer. So legally, only Medicaid and managed care Medicaid protects manufacturers from a duplicate discount. So we call it a duplicate discount. So, but only Medicaid and managed care Medicaid. Commercial payers are not protected, are not part of that protection for manufacturers. So manufacturers are upset because the PBMs are applying for that rebate and they know the hospital may have gotten a 340B price for that drug. So they're asking the hospitals to add an extra burden to their already heavy workload, and they want them to submit claims data so that they can then say, okay, we paid a 340B price to this hospital for this claim. PBM, you can't ask for a rebate, even though there's no legal protection there. So hospitals are like, hey, we don't have to submit the data. This is not a requirement for 340B. This is nowhere in any statute written that they have to do this in order to obtain a price. So there's been several lawsuits. There's about 3 lawsuits. HRSA won two of their lawsuits against the manufacturer, and they lost one. The one they lost, they are appealing. They decided to appeal. And naturally, the manufacturers are going to appeal the one that they lost against HRSA. Who's going to probably outlast in that arena? As you know, Pharma has very deep pockets, generational wealth. So they probably can outlast HRSA in the courts and drag this litigation on for who knows, probably till my child's an adult. So, I'm not expecting anything to come from the courts. That's what my opinion is.
So, I mean, there are several things in here that sort of strike out as interesting to me. And I have to admit, I've worked on both sides of this, right? I've worked as a pharmacist in the hospital, work with pharma companies all the time. Mm-hmm. Some of the larger hospitals I've worked at, yes, they do take care of indigent patients, but they have a huge other population. And you see hospitals do try to double dip, if you will. So when you talk about on the other hand, there are, as you've pointed out to me in the last conversation, there are clinics who are going, I'm serving primarily indigent care patients. Like I don't have the resources to manage this entire setup that you're asking me to manage. So there's obviously a balance. There's obviously a gray area that needs to be managed. What do you think is the right way to address this? Is it that that pharmaceutical companies should just simply go, okay, everyone who wants a 340B can have it? Or is there a middle ground, according to you?
I think at some point there may be a middle ground. Okay. They're allowing the community health centers who are HRSA grantees, they're allowing them to still receive 340B pricing in multiple contract pharmacy relationships. They're just denying the hospitals. Now, why they're doing this is because HRSA grantees, like community health centers, have to report their 340B revenue on their IRS documents, where hospitals don't. So I think that's where the disconnect is coming from the grantees versus the hospitals. But at the same time, hospitals are your true, especially 340B participating hospitals, are true safety nets. They're usually, they can be any type of hospital, a small critical access hospital to a large disproportionate share hospital, academic teaching facility, etc. But remember, they do have charitable losses too that they have to write off year after year. And 340B helps keep a lot of facilities open. Now, I'm not talking about the very large, famous hospitals that might be 340B eligible, but I'm talking about a lot of hospitals that are using this program just to sustain and take care of their patients and offer more patient services based on the savings that they have and have received. So this blow, now that, like I said, we're up to 13 manufacturers, is really hurting financially a lot of facilities from receiving that revenue. And HRSA has the right to actually penalize these manufacturers. So there's been some vocal opponents on the Hill and also, in Congress, pushing HRSA to finally implement and penalize these manufacturers for denying the pricing. So there's going to be a lot more to come in this space. Honestly, I don't see a resolution anytime soon. I think it's going to take an act of legislation versus litigation to actually remedy this problem. And that probably will come down to HRSA being granted some type of rulemaking authority, which they currently do not have. So if there's some rulemaking authority handed to HRSA where they can really implement and penalize these manufacturers, maybe decide to say, hey, you don't want to offer the 340B price as you promised when you signed that oh gosh, I'm always drawing blanks, that manufacturer agreement with Medicare. In order for Medicare to reimburse their drugs and Medicaid, they have to offer a 340B price. I think that's the pharmaceutical pricing agreement. It came to me. The pharmaceutical pricing agreement. I'm not a lawyer like you.
You're good. You're good.
Sometimes I got to remember what legally was the terminology there. But if they can start penalizing them or say, hey, we're going to kick you out of the Medicaid program if you don't comply to the agreement that you signed, there needs to be some more enforcement, something more serious to have the manufacturer stop what they're doing. Or maybe somewhere in the middle, we need to come to an agreement somewhere. Asking hospitals to submit data every 2 weeks to several different manufacturers, that's ridiculous. That's not doable. It's not manageable. And that onerous should not be onto the hospital. Really should not. So there needs to be something in the middle, and I honestly don't know what that will be. I always say there needs to be a come to Jesus between the manufacturers and the hospitals, a come to Jesus call meeting for them to bump heads and say, hey, let's come to some type of other arrangement or make this a little easier so that hospitals can still receive the benefit that they were receiving for years.
So what I'm really hearing you say is that there are obviously legitimate uses for the 340B program, and then there are definitely illegitimate uses for the 340B program. The biggest problem you have right now is the bureaucracy that's preventing clarity on which ones are deemed to be legitimate versus illegitimate. And the way pharma companies are trying to address this is by putting the onus onto the hospitals in this case and saying, you need to provide me with the data for us to determine if it's legitimate or illegitimate. And the question, however, is every individual manufacturer is doing it. It sounds like the very obvious middle ground is having the EMR system automatically updated to a central database. And that would be something that the manufacturers could check against.
Well, that will be very difficult because one, that's so, you're talking about a lot of PHI here, and also some of the pharmacies do not want this data. Now, I'm going to tell you why we have a problem with it. The problem with giving the manufacturers retail prescription data can turn, and this is, again, a arrangement between the PBMs, which are one of the most non-transparent business entities out here, unregulated, non-transparent. The PBMs are in there for profit. They are for profit, just like the manufacturers. They're all trying to make a buck. So the PBMs are negotiating whatever tier level with the manufacturer where they're going to put their drug based on whatever rebate pricing they're going to get, right? So the manufacturers are fighting with the PBMs over their rebates. That has nothing to do with the world of 340B in that realm, because they're going to ask for their rebates regardless. And again, there's no legal provision protecting commercial payers at all. So if this was based on just Medicaid and managed care Medicaid, which are legally protected, the manufacturer from paying a duplicate discount, that would be one thing. But they're asking for commercial data. And on top of that, what we're worried and concerned about is the PBMs receiving, the manufacturers receiving this data. They denied the PBMs their rebate. Who they're going to take it out on? The retail pharmacy. So
explain that to me. How does that process work? How would it affect the retail pharmacy?
So the PBMs will turn around and now start, like they've tried in the past, decrease reimbursements to the retail pharmacies. So because they want to make up their loss somewhere. So if they're not going to get their rebate from the manufacturer, they want to turn around and say, okay, pharmacy, we're going to now pay you AWP, whatever, minus some outrageous reimbursement. So that's why the pharmacies are really like, hey, don't give our data. And I'm telling you, it's coming from store 1235. Now they may turn around and say, we're losing money on the scripts with this store because we can't get our rebates. So we're going to now send a contract to that pharmacy with an unfavorable reimbursement because they do X amount of 340B prescriptions. That's the troubling turn of events that we see can happen.
But isn't that, again, very easily resolvable via legislation by saying you PBMs can choose, can determine pharmacy choice based on 340B status?
And it could be something legislatively, but then that's a business practice between the pharmacy and the PBM. So HRSA has been very reluctant to get into business practices. So, for instance, contract pharmacy dispensing fees. HRSA has no jurisdiction or realm over that.
But it wouldn't be HRSA. It would be Congress that makes that law.
Right, but Congress would then pass that responsibility down to HRSA because HRSA and OPA oversees the 340B program. It's like CMS. If something happens with Medicare and it affects Medicare, it goes to CMS. So that's why we're looking at it like, okay, can they impose something as a business practice? To me, that's more of a business practice, negotiation fees, etc., dispensing fees. That's more of a business practice. And I don't think government can really regulate that.
Well, I think you're not again, as a person who doesn't understand this space, and this is an area you are an expert in, I am not. But for me, it just comes down to what I really think everyone's asking for, whether it's the pharmacies, whether it's the hospitals, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies, and I'll admit not the PBMs in this case, is transparency, which is we need to know, for example, the hospital's going, I need to be able to serve my patients. I don't really care where the patients come from. I need to be able to serve them. Right. The pharmacist is going, I need to be able to make a decent profit on what I do and be reimbursed for my costs and plus make a profit on it. The pharmaceutical company is going, look, the 340B program set up to help indigent people. I'm happy to pay for the indigent people because that's part of the contract I got into, but I can't be used to offset other costs that are coming in because that's not what I signed up for because I don't have transparency into it. The only people who benefit from this, and again, I wish I had I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who works with PBMs and the like, but he would have given a very different side of this conversation. But his perspective, what it sounds like is if you have material transparency of here are the costs and here's how it's being used, then pharmacists can come out and go, look, you know what my costs are. They're very clear what my costs are, my actual acquisition cost, not my invoice cost, not my AWP. This is acquisition cost. Acquisition cost plus 2%, whatever it is. And the acquisition cost includes rebates, includes whatever else you want to throw on, discounts. They can all be thrown in there. Mm-hmm. And it's not a question of, and I'm avoiding getting on a soapbox because let's be honest, I don't actually know what I'm talking about. But that sounds like the solution. But what I'm hearing you saying is it's better to stay in the shroud of secrecy because of what PBMs might do. Is that accurate? Because of the fear of PBMs?
Well, PBMs are non-transparent. And so definitely, we don't know what the PBMs will do. We've had it happen twice.
Oh, sure.
That I remember in the past where they came with very discriminatory reimbursements to retail pharmacies. If they knew the hospital owned a retail pharmacy, I saw one contract at AWP minus 45%. How can you as a pharmacy accept minus 45% and stay alive and still fill prescriptions and satisfy the patients?
So I will challenge you on that, because AWP is not a real number. Everyone makes up the AWP. So one of the biggest problems in retail is the fact that, and I'll say this as a patient who had to access Ozempic. Mm-hmm. For me, Ozempic it's been a very valuable drug, but I paid, if I go and try to buy it, it's $1,100, because that they're selling me at AWP or they're selling me at whatever price they're going to sell it at.
Right.
But now that I have insurance, that same $1,100 drug is $25, because the acquisition price is actually the actual cost paid by the PBM is much, much lower, because they need to show the maximum discount associated with it. So to me, I hear your AWP, but I think that's a boondoggle to what the actual issue is, which is lack of price transparency. And the
PBMs are not going to tell you what they negotiated in that rebate at all. So they are the most non-transparent, but the manufacturers want the hospitals to be transparent. Why are you not demanding the PBM to be transparent?
I think everyone should be transparent personally.
Well, honestly, in healthcare, definitely. That would change the schematic of healthcare.
Right. I think that's really the problem. I don't think the problem is who is demanding it. It's how does a patient benefit? And in this case, it's patients who don't have access to everything that they need. So as part of this process, obviously you are involved in doing audits and you are trying to address this. Talk me through a HRSA audit. When is it required? What is the goal? And
so HRSA audit. So and I'm speaking on behalf of working with covered entities that have been audited by HRSA. I am not an agent of HRSA or the Bazell group that handles the audits for HRSA. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer. So no one calls me and go, hey, you're auditing my facility. No, not me. So a HRSA audit. So what I do for my clients is HRSA mock audits. So I pretty much follow the schematics that HRSA does. And I do, naturally a deeper dive because I'm a paid gun versus a government entity. But a HRSA audit is looking to make sure that you're compliant with the program, with the rules of 340B. And depending on the entity type, you have different rules. If you're a grantee, you have different rules than you are of a hospital. So I'm going to focus more on hospitals because that's more of the sticking point. My bigger business is with hospital clients. So HRSA looks at your policies and procedures, what you're doing to govern your policy, your 340B entity, your eligibility documentation. So they look at your cost report, their trial balance that supports your Medicare cost report. They look at to make sure what eligible reimbursable child sites are to the hospital, make sure those are registered appropriately, contract pharmacies, that the contracts are there in place, and that they're also registered appropriately on the database. So they do a review of what's on the database to make sure that's accurate. Then they look at basically, I would say 4 major areas. After registration information on a database, eligibility, they then look at diversion to make sure no patient, let me rephrase that, diversion to make sure patients that are 340B, that are not 340B eligible, do not receive 340B price drugs. So they audit against diversion, and it's pricing diversion. It's not any other pricing diversion. They look at duplicate discount with Medicaid fee for service. So because the statute was written in 92 before Medicaid managed care arose, they only can audit for fee for service. So they make sure that you as a covered entity are billing your state appropriately, like you said, to make sure there's no duplicate discount occurring so that the hospital's receiving the 340B price and that the state is not requesting the rebate from the manufacturer since the manufacturer is protected. So they audit that. If you're a certain entity type, you also have to abide by what they call the GPO prohibition, which is basically saying you cannot buy GPO price drugs for your eligible 340B outpatients. That's like the one thing in a statute that can actually get you removed from the 340B program is if you violate the GPO prohibition. I actually had a client that did violate the prohibition and got removed. And I'll tell you, that was the worst scenario that can happen. And it wasn't egregious. None of the findings have ever been, and I'm going to state that, since they've been auditing since 2012, none of the findings have been egregious. No one has purposely used the 340B program in a way to purposely, abuse it. All have been just mistakes. Like my client that had a GPO prohibition violation, it was a pure mistake. They did not know they were buying their drug that was supposed to be outpatient from their GPO account. And worst part, they were paying more. So it wasn't like they were doing anything, deviously. They were paying more. The 340B price was less. So it was an error. But because of that error, they were removed from the program for a year and a half. And they had to pay back every manufacturer they received a 340B price for in a year and a half. And this is a large county hospital in one of the major cities in this country. So they fought tooth and nail, legal went back and forth. They still lost. So they had to pay back the manufacturers their savings, which was terrible. But that's the GPO prohibition is the only thing that can really get you removed from the program. Another thing they look at, depending on your entity type, is orphan drug exclusion. So because of the ACA added those new hospital types, like critical access, sole community, rural referral centers, they have to abide by the orphan drug rule. They can't buy drugs that have an orphan indication on a 340B price. Crazy. That was one of the concessions they threw into the law. Makes no sense. It really doesn't make any sense. Those are critical hospitals that are in rural areas where you're now forcing patients to drive to larger academic, institutions somewhere to get their orphan drug treatments when they could have went to their nice little regional hospital down the street if they had access to buy that drug at 340B. So that's another soapbox. But
before we continue, does the patient understand if they're getting drugs at a 340B price or not? Or is it always at the provider level?
No, it's at the provider level. So It's a benefit for the institution. It's not a direct benefit for the patient. And nowhere in the statute does it say that. Okay. So it is written to be a benefit for the institution. And it's up to how that institution decides to pass on their savings, which many do in many fashions, from discounted drugs, sliding scale fees, even opening new clinics, like medication therapy management clinics, diabetes clinics. They do that with the dollars that they reap from the revenue, from the savings generated from the 340B program. But back to audits, they audit for orphan drugs to make sure you're not buying an orphan drug as well if you're one of those hospital types. So that's pretty much, I would say, the breadth of what an audit conduct. You have to look at patient records, look at Medicaid bills, and audit usually on site for an average institution to probably be a day to a day and a half, usually not longer than that. Then it'll take HRSA probably 3 to 4 months to get you to report on the findings. They won't say anything to you when they're on site. They'll wait till you get your report, and then you have to address whatever issues were found. So if they found an issue with duplicate discount, they would want you to then work with the state to ensure that no other claims, duplicate discounts occurred for any other manufacturers. And then how do you rectify that issue and pay back the manufacturer in that instance if it was a duplicate discount? Diversion, if they found that you gave the drug to a non-eligible patient, they'll make you pay back their manufacturer, and then give them a reason of why it happened and how you're going to prevent it from happening in the future. If there's issues with your policies, they will just say, here's recommendations to improve your policy. If there's a database error, like you put the wrong address for a CVS store or whoever, then they'll have you make those corrections. Those are different findings, and all the findings are actually publicly available on HRSA's website. So HRSA.gov/OPA, that's where you can find all that information from 2012 to current for any audit findings.
So we're doing this. We're finding out that so there is a certain amount of transparency that already exists in terms of HRSA doing these audits. My question for you is, how did that work out during COVID? Were they still going on site, or was it all done virtually?
So it was done virtually. They were doing virtual audits, just like I was doing virtual mock audits up until current. Like, I'm about to actually attend a HRSA audit in a couple of weeks for one of my clients. They are back to on-site. They have, as COVID numbers have decreased, thankfully, and, we pray that's the trend and it keeps going that way. They are now doing back to on-site. So they were doing virtual, which is a little harder to conduct, even for myself. It takes more time to do a virtual audit, whereas the on-site lets them, visit a contract pharmacy. They'll go ask to walk through if there's a contract pharmacy close by, or your retail pharmacies, just to see what you're following your policies and procedures. So I think on site is so much better. It's more personable, as you know, and I love seeing my clients, so I can't wait for them to keep bringing me back on site. Thankfully I got all my shots and booster, and I'm ready to get. I pray I don't catch the mess, and hope that I'm able to, continue to give my clients that personable attention that they deserve.
That's awesome. Well, we can keep going, keep talking about this. This is obviously a super interesting area that has a lot of stuff going on in there right now, Rita. But how can people reach you if they want to get more information, if they find that they are being caught up in a
wonderful HRSA audit?
Exactly.
So I have sat on several HRSA audits and helped covered entities of all types. So I don't just take care of hospitals. I do work with community health centers. I work with other HRSA grantees, HIV, Ryan Whites, etc. They can reach me at rita.baskett@ipsconsults.com, or they can go to my website and read more about our service offerings at www.ipsconsults.com. There is a contact form on that site as well, that if you want to fill that out to reach me, I will be more than happy to assist. Just a little extra added, we are a woman strong business, and we're also MBE certified. If you don't know what that means, that's Minority Business Enterprise, nationally certified. So we are able, if you have some diversity metrics, contracts that you have to meet, we can help in that way too. So, we'll be glad to help you. And we are pharmacist led. So my staff are pharmacists. So we have operational knowledge and been in this space for many, many years. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. I would normally ask a couple more questions, but we're already like 13 minutes over time. Actually, technically more like 23 minutes over time, but you are amazing as always. So thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. You. Any parting words, by the way?
Only parting words is make sure your program is compliant. If you are a covered entity, please, it helps keep the integrity of the program. And that's what I'm here to help you do.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshan. You have a great one.